I think there are some kind of mistaken beliefs among the American public about, who pays for these tariffs and their economic impact.
We've taken a few things for granted, and we need to be a bit tougher when it comes to even negotiating with our allies like the United States. Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Sabrina Maddeaux.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
Today, we're going deep on tariffs and the different ways they impact the middle class.
In some news, we've launched a brand new Substack. So along with liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, we'd love for you to come and check out all the written content. Think charts, reports, and articles, and all that fun stuff you're constantly seeing me tweet out.
We're recording this on January 17th, just a few days before the inauguration of Donald Trump. The incoming president has threatened Canada with a 25% across-the-board tariff on goods it imports from Canada and Mexico, and adding another 10% on goods imported from China. This raises the obvious question: what exactly is a tariff, and how does it impact people, Mike?
Yeah, so basically a tariff is an import tax where if you are importing a good from another country, the importer has to pay a tax on that, which is usually a percentage of the value of the good or the price. These things tend to be very complicated because different goods can have different tariffs associated with them. So, one good could be a 3% tariff and one could be a 20% tariff. So figuring that out, like every good, has a different tax on it. So first of all, figuring out how to classify a good is challenging. And then secondly, this like, where is the good from? It's not actually like which border it crosses, but it's actually based on where the good is made. And this becomes really challenging because you can have something like a car that might have parts from like 20 different countries. So there's this all like whole rules of origin mess to figure out like when is something a made in Canada car versus a made in Korea car versus something else. So it's a huge, really complicated system. But at the core of it is basically just a tax that is paid for by the importer when you bring a good into a country. So now we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about the effects of it. So Yale's budget lab has estimated that Trump's tariff will raise prices, costing U.S. families between $1,900 and $7,600 a year, depending on their income level and what exactly Trump does here. Needless to say, the vast majority of people in my profession, economists, think this is outright madness. Now, Sabrina, you're more in tune with the general public than I am. So how do you think this is playing out with the general public on both sides of the border?
I think it's a bit different on both sides of the border. I think in the US, there still isn't, well, I think on both sides, there still isn't a real understanding, like you said, of what tariffs are and how they actually work. It's really a complex subject that your average person hasn't probably thought about ever or since they were reading a high school or university textbook. In the States, there's so much political noise right now leading up to Trump's inauguration that there's this awareness that there's been threats made against Canada and Mexico and other countries. But in terms of the nitty gritty, I don't think there's a realization of the actual potential economic implications. Now, in Canada, there's a lot more anxiety surrounding this. Obviously, we're already in a state of economic turmoil, whether it's coming out of the pandemic and we're still dealing with the effects of inflation, the housing crisis, groceries, cost of living, and now add one more potential thing. And even if people don't understand the real ins and outs of tariffs, they know that this might be really bad economic news. So there's anxiety there and a real demand that politicians address this and get ahead of it. And that's why they're feeling so much pressure, both federally and provincially, to do so. There's also been a real surge of patriotism. You see it on social media that just a few years ago, we were talking about being, well, especially the liberals were talking about being post-national and moving forward in that way. And suddenly we're back to realizing how important it is to stand up for Canada, and that maybe we're taking a few things for granted and we need to be a bit tougher when it comes to even negotiating with our allies like the United States. But I want to move to talk about what's really going on here with Trump's tariff threats. He's throwing out a couple different reasons. So first, he's pointing fingers at Canada, saying we need to crack down on illegal border crossings and drugs supposedly flowing into the US from us. But what seems to be really annoying him is this $40 billion trade deficit with Canada. In plain English, that means Americans are buying $40 billion more stuff from Canada than Canadians are buying from the US. And Trump's basically saying, hey, Canada, you need us way more than we need you. But Mike, is it really that straightforward? Can you break that down a bit more?
Yeah, no, this idea that it means that one country needs another country more than another just doesn't make sense. So we have to understand with balance of trade that globally it has to balance out, right? For every country that runs a trade surplus, another one has to run a trade deficit, um, simply because global trade has to balance until we start trading with Martians or whoever. And if you bring it down to a personal level, I run a large trade deficit with the grocery store, right? I sell them absolutely nothing and I buy a lot from them. Similarly, I'm employed by the University of Ottawa, and I run a big trade surplus with them. I don't buy anything from the University of Ottawa except maybe the occasional Starbucks cup of coffee, but I sell my labor to them. But neither one of those means that I don't need the University of Ottawa. Clearly, I do because they're paying me. But it also doesn't mean that like I don't need the grocery store, even though I'm running a significant trade deficit with them. So I think that's how we have to look at things and just understand that people both need to sell things and need to buy things, and these aren't necessarily always going to balance out, particularly in any kind of bilateral relationship, that you will have trade deficits with some organizations and trade surpluses with others, and that's okay.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. But it seems like if Trump were to enact a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico, that this would hurt middle class Americans, many of whom voted for Trump in the first place. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would. I think would hurt the majority of them. I think the folks in that middle class may support them for a variety of reasons. That one, they might think that because that foreigners are basically paying this tax. It's not. It's the importer, but they kind of think foreigners do. Which means that okay, well, if they're going to pay my tax bill, then maybe my income tax will go down, or maybe government can start cutting other taxes. And there's also a belief that these tariffs are going to create a lot of jobs, and they might in some sectors with some offsetting losses in others. But yeah, I think these things are going to hurt the middle class in general more than they help. And again, I think there are some kind of mistaken beliefs among the American public about who pays for these tariffs and their economic impact.
So, Mike, you touched on this a bit, but like you said, there's a lot of confusion surrounding this. So, I want to drill down. Economists like yourself keep telling us that we, the consumers, end up paying more when tariffs kick in. It's like a hidden tax that shows up in our shopping cart. But if that's true, if American shoppers are the ones getting hit with higher prices, if this goes through, then why are Canadian businesses freaking out about these tariffs? What's got them so worried if they're just going to be passing the cost down?
Yeah, this is a great question and kind of shows how sort of complicated the dynamics are here. That it is absolutely true that the American importer pays these tariffs, and that could be a tariff on a car built in southwestern Ontario, or a barrel of crude oil from Alberta, or some lumber from British Columbia. But because those prices are now higher in the United States, American consumers and American businesses are going to buy less of those goods. So that's going to be difficult for these companies. Perhaps the Canadian companies may respond, try and get some of that market share back by lowering prices. That's certainly part of the hope of the Trump administration. I think the bigger hope of the Trump administration is that those consumers and businesses will buy American goods instead of Canadian goods. I think that's largely unrealistic, because it takes a long time to, rejig supply chains and, really kind of ramp these things up. And there's all kinds of capacity issues. I think what's more likely to happen is that American companies and businesses, instead of buying goods produced in Canada. They might buy goods produced in Australia or the UK. Or because prices are higher, they're just going to buy fewer goods. But overall, the impact is going to be, fewer cars and barrels of crude oil sold from Canada to the United States, and there's going to be some squeezes on profit margins as well. So it's certainly not good for Canadian businesses.
Now, how would these tariffs and the broader trade war that Trump is threatening to launch affect the Canadian middle class?
Largely through jobs. Largely, again, go to these examples where if Americans aren't buying as many cars manufactured in southwestern Ontario, that's not good for the assembly plants and all the sort of tier one and tier two parts manufacturers across the supply chain. If we're not selling as much oil to the Americans, that's not good for workers in Alberta. And then we also have to realize that Canada may respond in kind, and that can create some challenges for Canadian businesses and consumers.
So, if Trump does impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods, what measures could Canada actually take to retaliate? I know many things have been proposed, including disrupting energy that the US uses to power in their manufacturing in cities.
Yeah, and we should remember that this isn't our first rodeo with this. That Trump did this back in his first administration with steel and aluminum and a number of other things, and Canada retaliated by putting our own tariffs on American-made goods. So things like orange juice, right? That we don't produce up here. We could put a tariff on. But that certainly doesn't help middle class consumers. My daughter is going to be upset if we're not buying as much orange juice because that's one of her favorites. So that's going to be challenging for us. Obviously we can, as mentioned, we can do things on the energy file. The American government has a massive debt. So there's ideas out there that maybe Canadian pension funds and other Canadian investors will buy less of that debt, which might cause American interest rates to be higher than they otherwise would. So we do have instruments that we can use. It's a bit of a challenge because they're so much bigger than we are that their tariffs probably hurt us more than we hurt them. And these tariffs have impacts in Canada as well, right? That people often joke, or economists joke, that this fight is, you've got one country saying, oh, I'm going to keep punching myself in the face, and the other country goes, oh yeah, well, if you're punching yourself in the face, we're going to respond by punching ourselves in the face. So it's ultimately challenging, right? That any tool that you use, the country ends up paying a price as well.
Well, based on that, I have a feeling what your answer might be. But do you see any way in which a US Canada trade war might actually benefit Canada?
Yeah, I think I kind of signaled where I was going with this. Is repeatedly punching yourself in the face a good thing? And the answer is no. That really nobody wins a trade war, right? So I think the only way that this benefits Canada is through some kind of, I don't know, weird butterfly effects of something where you notice we're getting Canadians are getting a little more patriotic. We saw recently this kind of Team Canada type approach where all but one premier was kind of involved. And, you had Wab Kinew, the NDP premier of Manitoba, and Doug Ford, the conservative premier of Ontario, looking like BFFs and, really kind of complimenting each other. So, maybe this brings us together. Maybe it causes us to examine, how we can be more productive as a country. I know there's thoughts out there that this might spur us to reduce internal trade barriers. I don't really buy that. I mean, these barriers have survived 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and several recessions. I don't know if they're going anywhere, but that might happen. So there may be some beneficial side effects, kind of butterfly effect type side effects. But overall, I would say at the end of the day, nobody wins a trade war.
Well, I think the biggest thing there is it's only people like us talking about internal trade barriers. I've yet to hear anyone with the power to actually remove or diminish those actually bring it up as a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the general public, is spends too much time thinking about, truck width regulation differences between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But, it's possible. We'll have to see where this goes. So, I've been focusing on the economics of this, and you've been asking me questions about the economics. So I'd like to ask you about the politics of this. We're seeing politicians on both sides of the border using this trade tension for their own messaging. In your view, like how much of this tariff threat is actually about trade policy, and how much of this is political theater on frankly both sides of the border?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that on the southern border in the US, Trump has obviously signaled he believes in tariffs. He likes tariffs as a solution, even if perhaps he doesn't understand all the consequences of actually enacting them. But at the same time, he is using, the aggression towards Canada on the tariff front or aggression towards Greenland as I think a little bit of a distraction for some of the domestic issues in the States that he might not have a great idea on how to tackle coming into office when there's really high expectations from his base on things like lowering grocery prices, housing prices. And this is a great way to have the news cycle focus on different things. At the same time, he's still going through some legal troubles in the background. There are some very controversial confirmation hearings going on. So this has really flipped the news cycle, and he's a master of the media. So if he can focus people outside of US borders rather within them and sow chaos elsewhere, he's absolutely going to do that. And he's quite frankly good at it. On the Canadian side, politicians are taking it seriously because it is a very real economic threat, like we've discussed. But as always in politics, that doesn't mean there aren't other benefits or opportunities for people. I think, especially for the premiers, when you have some premiers who might be thinking about if they have a chance at a federal political career later on down the road, or maybe what they want to do after their premiers, if they want to go back into media or punditry, this is an opportunity for them to get not only national media coverage and name recognition, but international in the States. We see a lot of them going on, whether it's CNN or Fox News. And while that comm strategy is important, it's also benefiting them in certain ways. And you have Doug Ford out there this week with his Canada's not for sale hat that got memed around the internet. So certainly this is playing into some of their own political agendas. And we might have an announcement coming up from Chrystia Freeland about announcing her Liberal leadership run. And the rumor has been reported by media that her first big policy proposal will be like for like retaliation on any tariffs. And I think that's interesting as well, because rather than announcing with a more domestic focused issue, whether it's a crisis like immigration or housing or healthcare, that she's going the America route. So maybe that's avoiding talking about some policy areas where the Liberals haven't been quite so strong and hopping on this very of the moment news story. So it'll be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I gotta say, I want one of those hats. I'm a hat guy, so I'll probably be ordering one. I have to admit, I'm not always the biggest Doug Ford fan, but I gotta say that was a great hat.
The hat was pretty great. Maybe instead of raising taxes, we can start selling political merch. That's a new angle to raise public revenues.
That's how we can eliminate the deficit through hat sales. I
Through
love it.
hats. But here at the Missing Middle, we do try to be solution focused. Is there anything a regular citizen can do about this situation, or are we basically just left to hope that our politicians sort it out for us?
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging that ultimately we don't have power to do all of that much directly. So our impact has to be indirect. I think the one thing I want to see from all Canadians is that Team Canada approach, where I think if this ends up just being Albertans mad at Ontarians, mad at Quebecers, then I do think the Americans kind of win at that point, where if we're all just kind of fighting each other. So I think we have to sort of recognize this external threat and keep our attention that way, rather than debating or saying like throwing each other under the bus and getting into these provincial squabbles, which is a Canadian pastime, and it can be fun in normal times. But I do think we probably would be better served sort of recognizing where the truth that threats are, and as sort of individual Canadians focusing our attention there.
Couldn't agree more. We need to stay away from the chaos and present as one strong Canada and one strong voice. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching and listening, and of course to our producer, Meredith Martin.
And if you have any thoughts or questions about tariffs or the price of orange juice, please send us an email to missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you all next time.